Sitapati Garu, a very knowledgeable person, approachable person, a person with a clarity on the subject, experience dealing in the criminal cases, and he is going to talk to you on one important, very important topic, that is FIR, investigation and charge sheet. Very, very important topic of pre-trial criminal procedure. Every one of us, more particular me, I think that I may be knowing little things, but the importance of this pre-trial course, that FIR and investigation charge sheet is very, very big, very, very huge. Cases are decided on this first procedure itself. FIR is filed, when FIR is required to be filed, when charge sheet is filed, and what's the procedure adopted that, what's the investigation taken place. All these are the very important issues. Very well. You know very well section 170, 154 of the Criminal Procedure Code talks about the FIR. It has laid down 3 subsections, how to do it and who is to do it, what's the content of that FIR. Accordingly, section 173 talks about the charge sheet and inquiry. Some disturbance is coming. Please mute your mics. Request to mute your mics, please. Recent case about the Nirbhaya and case about the Disha, which is recently handled by the police people in Hyderabad, also discussed at length about these particular FIRs. For the first time, the concept of zero FIR was introduced in the Nirbhaya case, but not practiced much after that. Recently, after this particular case of the Disha case, the zero FIR system model or process has become very known to people. There is a experience and record of filing of some zero FIR cases recently because of that particular part. And zero FIR, the importance of that also will be discussed now. You are well aware about the delays in filing of the FIRs, which caused in many cases to be dismissed by the court of law. The delays may be at 3 different places. Delay by the informant himself after happening of the particular offense. Delay may be filing of or preparing of the FIR. Delay may be in transmitting or communicating the FIR to magistrate to bring before to that. So any delay, 3 areas, having no justified reason, having no reasonability, will be damaging the case, though the law has never said that this is the time frame of the filing of the FIR also, but depending upon each case, depending upon the distance of the police station to the offense or the place of crime, this can be construed, and depending upon the availability of the people around, this plays very important role part of that. Once this FIR is then in cognizable cases, police people sometimes may refuse. What are the remedies available to the people when a FIR is not filed and not accepted of the people? What happens when FIR is given through phone calls? People may not have that much of time to go there. Sometimes they may inform the police station. Can a FIR be registered on the call given by any person? What's the procedure laid down there? What's the impact? What's the result of that particular calls by FIRs by phones, and all these are the many issues associated with this. In Lalita Kumari case, the Supreme Court has given a very detailed guidelines how to go for FIRs and how it can be make it, in what cases the immediate FIR can be made or investigation may be made, and they have given when the preliminary inquiry is required before FIR is filed. All these are given in Lalita Kumari case. Lalita Kumari case will be the one of the important example of that. In addition to the many cases where the courts have given even 24 hours delay is not considered as a unreasonable. Sometimes even 3-4 hours delay in informing the case is also considered as a part of delay. All this depends upon the various subject matter case to case. Under these circumstances, we are here to hear our respected Honorable Justice Mr. G. Sitapati Garu, who is a part of ICFI Law School at present. Sir, faculty from all law schools of ICFI Group and many other law colleges in Hyderabad and outside India also participating in this. They are ready and eager to hear you, sir. Please take your class, sir. Thank you very much for providing this. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Narasimha Rao garu. Good afternoon to everyone. Hope I am visible and audible. It doesn't matter if I am not visible, but it will be enough if I am audible. At the outset, let me thank Professor Narasimha Rao garu and his team for giving me this opportunity to interact with the members of the faculty of ICFI Law School, Hyderabad and outside, and for giving me a first opportunity of such interaction online. Therefore, I seek your indulgence if there are any interruptions because of technical problems or otherwise also during the course of the discussion. As Professor Narasimha Rao garu has pointed out.
Sir, excuse me 1 minute, sir.
Yes.
I request all the participants to give their questions on a chart like every day. At the end, people will be reading, the Dilip will be reading the question, our Honorable Justice will be answering them, part of it. So let us not disturb the class because of the mic issues.
Yes, sir. I'll be too happy to answer the questions or queries raised by the learned participants. I'm aware that I'm addressing not the students, but the teachers. Therefore, I know my limitations also, because you're all better equipped academically than me. I only try to present the matter which you're all already aware of with some practical perspective, drawing from my long experience as a trial court judge and appellate court judge, and having dealt with these issues day in and day out. Well, as instructed by Professor Narasimha Rao garu, we are dealing with three important aspects of criminal law relating to FIR, investigation, and charge sheet. You say law is an ocean, criminal law is a sea, and these chapters, FIR, investigation, and charge sheet by themselves are very wide and huge topics, which can be too huge to be covered in a short span of 1.5 hours or 2 hours. But still, we'll try to deal with as many aspects as possible which are relevant for these three items. First, we deal with FIR. As you're all aware, the FIR, as the name itself indicates, is a first information report. It assumes a lot of importance and significance in the criminal justice delivery system because it sets the criminal law into motion. The objective and purpose of an FIR, registering an FIR, is to set the criminal law into motion. Without an FIR, there cannot be any further proceedings by way of investigation or inquiry or trial. Therefore, whenever an offence is alleged to have been committed, whatever be the offence, under the Indian Penal Code or any other act which defines a particular act of omission or commission as an offence and prescribes a punishment for such offence, the FIR has got to be registered. Whole process starts with registration of the FIR. And who can lodge the FIR? General perception is that the victim of the offence or the victim of the crime, because he is the aggrieved person, he or she is the aggrieved person. Whenever I say he, it includes the she also under the General Clauses Act. He or she is supposed to lodge a complaint with the police. Is it necessary that only the victim shall lodge a complaint? No. Anyone on behalf of the victim or independently also can lodge a complaint with the police. Only thing is, it should contain the complaint or the report to the police should contain the details of the offence to the extent required to constitute it as a cognizable offence. Because under section 154 CRPC, what it says is, very opening sentence, every information relating to the commission of a cognizable offence. Therefore, the FIR should contain information relating to commission of a cognizable offence. Who gives the FIR is not very important. And then, should it be a form of a written complaint or can it be oral statement also? Yes, it can be either way. Because section 154 itself contemplates that if given or to an officer in charge of police station shall be reduced to writing by him or under his direction and be read over to the informant. If it is a signed complaint given by the victim, straight away, based on that signed written complaint, FIR is registered. And in large number of cases, particularly coming from the rural areas where the illiteracy is prevalent in wide measure, the victim may not be able to write or get it written. Therefore, they straight away come to the police station and orally report to the SHO, that is a station house officer, about the offence, and then the SHO records the statement of this victim and obtains his or her signature or thumb impression, as the case may be. So that is a complaint which is recorded. There is an oral complaint recorded by the police. So whether it is a written complaint or oral complaint reduced to writing, it shall bear the signature of or the thumb impression, as the case may be, of the complainant. Then, what will the police do with that complaint? Generally, they are supposed to register the complaint as an FIR under appropriate sections of law. the victim may not be aware of the provisions of law or the sections in the IPC or any other penal enactment as to under which section this offence falls, and therefore the FIR need not contain the section of law which regulates, which controls the concerned offence. The concerned police will identify which is the relevant and appropriate section of law under which the offence is to be registered. It's a very important aspect because there lies a lot of discretion with the police. They can register the FIR under whatever sections they would like to. Very recently, a few days back, there was an incident of a poisonous gas leakage at Visakhapatnam, which all of you are aware, having gone through the media reports. And there was an allegation that the police have not registered the FIR under appropriate sections of law, and only a minor sections of IPC were invoked. Whether it is true or not, we are not concerned. There was such an allegation which has appeared in the media. Therefore, whenever the police register an FIR, they are supposed to register FIR under sections which are relevant and applicable. The FIR may contain the offence which constitutes several incidents, and each such incident may constitute a separate and distinct offence. Therefore, a number of sections may have to be invoked, whether under IPC or any other enactment, and all the sections normally will be mentioned in the FIR. Of course, if any section is omitted at that stage, it is not going to be fatal, and later after investigation, these sections of law which are initially noted in the FIR, they keep changing, and based on the investigation, based on the evidence gathered during the investigation, the appropriate sections of law will be mentioned by the police in the final report which they file before the court under section 173 CRPC, which is called the charge sheet, about which we will be discussing a little later towards the end of the session. Therefore, in the FIR, section of law will be mentioned. Then there is a amendment introduced by way of Criminal Law Amendment Act 13 of 2013, with effect from 3/2/2013, that is after Nirbhaya's case. They have introduced a proviso in section 154, which states that if the information is given by woman against whom an offence under section 326A, 326B, 354, 354A, 354B, 354C, 354D, then 376A, B, C, D, E, and section 509 IPC are released to have been committed or attempted, then such information shall be recorded by a woman police officer or any woman officer. Why this provision was introduced by way of a proviso, by way of amendment, is the general complaint was that a woman victim was too scared to go to a police station to give a complaint of a crime that has been committed against her. Whenever she goes to the police station, the first thing she has to face there is a totally hostile environment, harassment, sometimes abuse, and then with a sense of disbelief, the police treat them, and without any trust in the complaint or the contents of the complaint. Therefore, normally, forget about the metropolitan cities or other cities, in the rural areas and semi-urban areas, even now, the women or the victim girl, they hesitate to go to the police station to lodge an FIR. Even in the recent case of Disha also, we have seen the parents of the victim. The allegations were that they were harassed by the police and they were made to run from pillar to post and post to pillar in the middle of the night, and there was any amount of delay in registering the FIR, apart from the harassment, inconvenience, and whatnot, and there was any amount of delay in registering the FIR itself, even when the parents have approached the police station, then that will come again in the context of zero FIR. Then, so the purport of this proviso introduced by a amendment in the year 2013 after the Nirbhaya's case was that whenever there is a crime against women, whenever the victim girl or the victim woman is coming forward to give a complaint, that complaint has to be registered, that has to be reduced to writing by a woman police officer or any woman officer. So that was a very important amendment made to infuse a sense of safety and security to the victim girl or victim woman at the police station. Then there is another proviso. Because these are all amendments recently introduced, we are laying stress on them. There is another proviso further provided that in the event that the person against whom an offence under section 354, etc., 376, only crime against women 354, 376, is temporarily or permanently mentally or physically disabled, such information shall be recorded at the residence of the said person. So, if the victim girl happens to be mentally or physically disabled, permanently or temporarily, then the police have to go to the place of residence of the victim, at the residence of the person seeking to report such offence, or at a convenient place of such a person's choice, in the presence of an interpreter or a special educator, as the case may be. Because they are mentally challenged, then perhaps the services of an interpreter or a special educator may be required. The police are bound to take those services also. Why this further proviso was introduced? For the simple reason that the victim girl, particularly when she is mentally or physically disabled, she will be more convenient. She will feel at home if the complaint is recorded at her place of residence or at any other place of her convenience, because she will not be she will not have to face the hostile environment, a perceptible hostile environment at the police station while making the complaint. Then the recording of such information shall be videographed. It is also again introduced by amendment that recording of the complaint by a victim will be videographed. Supported by judicial magistrate under clause A of section 5 of section 164 as soon as possible. Then the 164 statement, as you are all aware, is recorded before a magistrate. The statement of the accused, or the statement of the witness, or the statement of the complainant, as the case may be, that is recorded for a magistrate under section 164 CRPC, which we'll deal with a little later, and that has more sanctity than the statement recorded by the police, because under the provisions of the Evidence Act, section 25 of the Evidence Act, any statement made before the police, they have confession, otherwise it's not admissible in evidence, and therefore, but a statement made before a judicial authority like a magistrate is straightaway admissible, and therefore, because having regard to the nature of the offence, which is the crime against the woman, and these provisions, special provisions, were introduced by way of amendment in the year 2013. Some amendments were made in 2005, some amendments were made in 2009, and certain other amendments were introduced in the year 2013. These are all special provisions relating to the registration of the offence against the woman, and the investigation also. Certain amendments were made regarding investigation also. And then the next thing the police have to do is, after registering the FIR, the copy of the original FIR shall be sent to the magistrate, and a copy of it shall be given to the complainant. The general complaint is that the police invariably, at least if not now earlier, the complaint used to be that the police never bothered to give a copy of the FIR to the complainant. It is mandatory that the police shall furnish a copy of the FIR to the complainant free of cost, and then send the original FIR to the magistrate, nearby magistrate having jurisdiction to try the offence. So why this provision that it shall be sent to the magistrate? Of course, giving copy of the FIR to the complainant is for the purpose of by way of acknowledgement. But why this provision that it shall be sent to the magistrate? Because the FIR original will be sent to the magistrate. The police will retain only a copy of it for investigation purpose. And the magistrate also receives the FIR in person, whether he is on duty. Of course, he is supposed to be on duty 24/7. So whether he is in the court or whether he is in the residence, wherever he is, it will be furnished to him personally. That is by sending it through some authorized personnel of the police department, and it will be received personally by the magistrate, who will endorse the time and date of its receipt. In most of the cases, that may not assume as importance the time and date at which it is received by the magistrate, but in all serious offences, grave offences that carry punishment of more than 7 years, like offences of rape or murder or any other major offence, grave offence, this assumes very great importance, because the first line of defence by any defence counsel during the course of the trial is that there is an amount of delay in registering the FIR and in sending the FIR to the magistrate. So that will be the very first contention when the defence counsel opens up their arguments. Why they make this argument in every case is, of course, the delay may be fatal in some cases, it may not be fatal at all in some other cases, but still they make this argument only to show that their idea or effort is to show that during the interregnum, several things have happened and the police have managed, or the witnesses were managed, or certain the original version is kept aside, and some improvements or embellishments have been injected or introduced into the case to dilute the FIR. So that will be the complaint always by the complainant side. But the accused will contend in every case that because of the delay in registering the FIR, the version of the complainant cannot be believed. If really the alleged offence is true, the FIR should have been lodged immediately, but not with a delay of 2 days or 3 days. So during the 2-3 days time, they have thought over the matter. They have sought to indulge in false implication of persons. They try to make certain false allegations, create false evidence, and therefore this FIR cannot be looked into. This FIR, which is the very basis of the entire edifice of this criminal case, loses its importance. That will be the line of argument by the defence counsel. Therefore, once the magistrate endorses the time and date of receiving the FIR by him, that is sacrosanct. That can never be questioned, because he is a judicial authority. He puts his signature on that, puts the date, puts the time also, and he keeps these FIRs also in all important cases in a personal safe custody also, and that will be given to the concerned office in the court only at the time of trial. In some cases, they may have to be kept in the personal custody of the magistrate also, depending upon the nature of the offence, so that nobody will have access to the contents of the original FIR so as to tinker with them or to do any mischief with the contents. Therefore, the FIR is a very important sacred document which has to be preserved. And whenever this aspect of delay is canvassed by the defence counsel in the course of their arguments, then the prosecution will try to say that no, the incident has happened at so and so time, and the FIR has reached the magistrate at so and so time. Therefore, there is not much of delay. And even if the delay is there, in the given circumstances of the case, the delay doesn't matter. There are any number of cases, a category of decisions which say that delay in lodging the FIR is not fatal to the prosecution case. Just because there was delay, the FIR cannot be thrown out. The case cannot be thrown out. The reason is the delay occurs because of a number of factors. The factors are variable. There are multiple factors. It depends upon the nature of the offense, the victim who is involved, and if the victim is seriously injured, first he or she has to be taken to the hospital. That is the first priority. Immediately after the incident, when the victim is attacked with a weapon like a knife or an axe or any other sharp-edged weapon, then if the victim sustains major injuries, the first priority of the people around is to rush him to a hospital to see that some medical aid is given to him. Then only they think of going to the police station. Therefore, the usual argument advanced is they should have first come to the police station and then the police would have taken them to the hospital. No, that's not correct. First, they go to the hospital. That's how the human mind works in the given set of circumstances. And then, after some medical aid or first aid, if he is able to come out of the hospital, then he will come to the police station. Otherwise, the hospital authorities they send a requisition to the concerned police saying that a medical legal case has been admitted. The person is having injuries. So therefore, you are requested to come and record his statement. Then the police go there, they record the statement, that is registered as FIR. Therefore, then the distance between the place of occurrence and the nearest police station, the distance between the place of occurrence and the nearest hospital. We should always think of these things in the rural scenario or semi-urban scenario of our society, giving a wide margin to the levels of illiteracy and also the lack of access to transport. And suppose the offense has taken place in a very remote village, a remote area, then sometimes it takes 3-4 days also for lodging a complaint with the police. Therefore, it all depends. It all depends on the situation and the place where the people are staying and the distance between the place of occurrence and the place of the police station. Therefore, all this will be taken into consideration by the court while deciding whether in fact there was delay in lodging the FIR in the given case or whether this delay has occurred in the natural course of human conduct and in the natural course of events that were prevailing at that particular point of time. Then the court will make an assessment as to whether this delay is properly explained or not. Of course, the burden is always on the prosecution to explain the delay. The defense will only say that no, the FIR is delayed by 3 days. That's all. Therefore, it cannot be looked into. And the prosecution will explain, no, sir, this is the situation. This is the distance. So this much time it takes. And all this will be elicited in the cross-examination of the witnesses also. And from the evidence on record, the court will decide whether the delay that has occurred really impacts on the case or not. What is the impact it will have on the case? Whether it impacts adversely or whether it can be ignored. Whether the delay is deliberate, whether the delay is because of any any infabulations or any second thoughts or any improvements or any embellishments that were sought to be introduced by the complainants people. Because sometimes in cases, particularly the offences occurring in the faction-ridden areas where the crime is committed because of the faction feud between two groups, then sometimes there will be delay because they think as to who are the persons to be implicated. There is a decision of the Andhra Pradesh High Court also where they have made a general statement that in faction feud areas like Rayalaseema districts, just because the delay in lodging the FIR and false personation of the people and false implication of the people is a common thing. Therefore, the court has to decide based on the evidence again, not on any assumptions. Based on the evidence, the court will decide whether this delay is a natural delay, whether the delay is duly explained, or whether the delay is inordinate and it cannot be excused under any circumstances. In most of the cases, from practical point of view, the delay is not taken into consideration, at least in the present day scenario. Now the communications have improved, the transport facility has improved, and the access to the public transport has improved. Literary levels also have raised, and therefore nowadays there's not much of a delay. But even if there is a few hours delay, then the defense counsel will try to take advantage of it. Suppose the murder has taken place right in front of the police station, or just a few yards away from the police station, and if there is a delay of 8 hours or 10 hours, then certainly it is a delay which has to be duly explained by the prosecution. Therefore, it all depends upon the facts and circumstances of the case, nature of the offence, and all that. Coming to the crime against women, there is bound to be delay in lodging the complaint. And this is recognized by many judicial pronouncements of our High Court and also the Honorable Supreme Court. And you know the catina of cases, I did not go deep into them. And the Supreme Court has said in many cases, especially Justice Krishna Iyer in his, characteristic way, has said that this delay occurs almost every case when it is a crime against a woman, because you cannot expect a victim girl or woman to immediately rush to the police station and lodge a complaint. She will confide in her own kith and kin, mother and others in the family, that too with a lot of hesitation. And then the parents have to reconcile first to themselves. First they will go into a sense of shock. Then they have to come out of it, and then they have to reconcile with the realities of life. Then they head their way to the police station, and many a time, particularly in the villages, they encounter resistance, they encounter obstruction from the accused party, because if the accused is known person, he is a resident of the same village or nearby village, then certainly there will be obstruction from the accuser side. They will be preventing these unfortunate victims, people, from going to the police station. This they have to come over, and then only they can reach the police station. So during the course of this saga, there will be any amount of delay occurring, and therefore in almost every case, when it is a case of a crime against a woman, there will be delay, and that delay is usually explained, and the court always takes the explanation as satisfactory, and normally the delay is condoned and is not taken serious note of. Then, in the beginning, we were saying that the FIR will be registered only when it discloses information relating to cognizable offence. Suppose there is information relating to a non-cognizable offence, then the police cannot directly register FIR. They can only refer them to the court. So, on the orders of the court, the police can register the FIR. So, normally in non-cognizable cases, the police will not entertain, and they will not register a case, they will not investigate. The party will be advised to go to the court, and then they will make a complaint before the court, and on the direction of the court, the police will investigate, and then they can file a charge sheet also. While conducting investigation into non-cognizable cases, the police will have all the powers which they are having while conducting investigation into a cognizable offence, except the power to arrest without warrant. During the course of investigation of a cognizable offence, the police have the power to arrest the offender without a warrant. But in the case of a non-cognizable offence, they can only investigate on the directions of the court, but they cannot arrest without a warrant. And for arresting the person, they have to take the permission of the court. Therefore, the leading decision on this, was the state of Haryana versus Bhajan Lal. You know, Bhajan Lal was the former Chief Minister of Haryana. 1992 Criminal Law Journal, Supreme Court, 527. I repeat, state of Haryana versus C.H. Bhajan Lal, 1992 Criminal Law Journal, 527 SC, which highlights the importance of the FIR and how it sets the law into motion, and whether the delay is fatal or not, and almost all the aspects which we have now discussed, they are referred to in the judgment. And one more aspect before we close this aspect relating to FIR is that the question is whether the FIR should contain all the details of the offence. Whether FIR should contain all the details for the police to investigate. No, because FIR is intended to set only the criminal law into motion. During the course of investigation, all the facts will come out. That is the very purpose of investigation. Therefore, in the FIR, the whole story need not be told. Even the names of accused need not be mentioned. The names of the witnesses need not be mentioned. Only the offense, gist of the offense has to be mentioned to show that it constitutes a cognizable offense or non-cognizable offense. So if the FIR contains information to the extent that it relates to a cognizable offense, that is enough. The rest of the job will be done by the police during the course of investigation. And FIR can be registered based on a telephonic information also. And because nowadays, it's not necessary that everybody should go to the police station physically, give the complaint. By telephone also, the complaint can be given, and that need not contain all the details also. Subsequently, of course, the person has to identify himself and give his number, address, everything, whatever particulars are required, and then the police will come to him. They will take his complaint, they will take his statement, and then that will also be attached to the FIR. But thing is, police will make an entry in the general diary. In every police station, the duty of the SHO is, that is station house officer, is to maintain a diary of events, which is called GD, that is general diary. So it contains entries seriatim 1, 2, 3, 4, day wise and date wise. Therefore, today the day starts, calendar day starts at 12 o'clock in the night. Then from 12 onwards, every minute, every hour, whatever has happened, that has to be entered in a sequential manner, and mentioning the times. Therefore, when a person makes a complaint to the police through phone, the SHO has to make an entry in the general diary as to at what time the information is received by the phone, so that tomorrow at the time of trial, it will be mentioned to the court that the very first information was given to the police about this offence at so and so time by way of a telephonic call. Subsequently, of course, the party has gone there and given the complaint, because it may take some time for him to physically reach the police station. Therefore, before that, he can inform the police by making a telephone call, and that will be noted in the general diary of the police station. And then, what is the importance of this FIR in terms of its evidentiary value? Otherwise, what is the evidentiary value of this FIR, and what role it plays in the course of trial? See, the FIR can be used as substantive. It cannot be used as substantive or primary evidence of its contents. It is not a piece of evidence by itself. It is only a complaint given by the victim to the police, based on which the investigation has commenced. It is not a piece of evidence by itself. It can be used in evidence for purpose of both corroboration and contradiction. The difference between the FIR, that is a complaint, and the other statements of the witnesses recorded under section 161 CRPC, statements of witnesses, it includes the statement of the complainant also. After giving this FIR, then during the course of investigation, the police record the statement of the complainant also, and also other witnesses. Therefore, those statements are different. They are not admissible in evidence except for the purpose of contradiction. But the FIR is admissible in evidence both for purpose of corroboration and also for contradiction. But FIR by itself is not a primary evidence of its contents. This is AR 1991. Supreme Court, page 31. I repeat, AR 1991, SC, Supreme Court, 31. Of course, there are a number of judgments reiterating this position from time to time, and it's now a very well settled proposition. It can be used only to corroborate or contradict evidence under Section 145 and Section 157 of the Evidence Act. Therefore, if somebody prevaricates and indulges in contradicting himself or herself during the course of giving evidence at the time of trial, and then the FIR will be, he will be confronted with the contents of the FIR to elicit the contradictions. Then these contradictions are admissible. And the prosecution can rely upon this FIR, which is usually marked as the first exhibit in the case, to corroborate the version of the prosecution. Then another judgment is State of versus Anirudh Singh. State of Gujarat versus Anirudh Singh. AR 1997, Supreme Court 2780. AR 1997, Supreme Court 2780. So these are the two judgments which highlight the importance of the FIR and what is the evidentiary value the FIR carries in the course of the trial. And then after registering the FIR, which is not be all and all, only sets the criminal law into motion, then what is it the police have to do? That is, they have to investigate to find out who has committed the crime and who are the witnesses for the crime and what are the weapons or other incriminating material that can be searched for and seized to prove the offense and various other aspects. Before that, as I was mentioning to you earlier, this concept of zero FIR. What is that zero FIR? Normally, it's not actually a new concept introduced into law by way of any amendment. The FIR, whenever a person goes to a police station, nearest police station, and lodges a complaint alleging a particular offense against him or her, the police are bound to receive the same if it discloses commission of a cognizable offense. They have to register the FIR. They can't refuse to register the FIR. But then what was happening was everywhere, not confined to any particular area or district or state, everywhere, the police, for their own reasons and for obvious reasons, which I need not mention, they normally discourage people giving the complaints, and then they advise them to go to some other police station saying that it is not within our jurisdiction. Sometimes the offences take place in the border areas also, borders between the police. Every police station has earmarked area of operation, and sometimes the offence occurs in the bordering areas, or if part of the offence occurs in within the limits of one police station, another part occurs within the limits of another police station, then the parties will not go to all the police stations concerned. They will go only to a particular police station, and they are bound to register the FIR. And in case they are not having jurisdiction to investigate, they can send it to the concerned police station. But they cannot ask the party to go around to all the police stations, making them to run between pillar and post, which has happened in Disha's case recently. In that case, what happened was the incident occurred first within the limits of this airport police station, and then she was taken somewhere about 15 kilometers away on the highway, and there a further offence occurred, which was in the limits of another police station. Therefore, the parents who have gone to give a complaint, they had to run between these two police stations in the dead of the night, and neither of the police registering the case, registering the FIR. Therefore, to avoid these difficulties to the victims, particularly in the case of crime against women, recently the governments, the state governments have also issued circular instructions to all the police stations also that they shall register the complaint as an FIR. And if it is not within their jurisdiction, then it will be sent to the concerned police station having jurisdiction to investigate. The people cannot be asked to go away without registering the FIR, because sometimes there may be a bona fide doubt also, because when the part of the offense occurs in one area and the other part occurs in some other area, and the police may be having a genuine doubt also in some cases, but in some cases they do it for some other reason, then the problem comes. Therefore, the victim should not be, put to hardship. Already they have suffered the crime, they have suffered the aftermath of the crime, and again they are harassed means it's a situation of coming from bad to worse. Even in the recent gas leakage case at Visakhapatnam also, there were allegations which were shown in the media that the police were not prompt in registering the FIRs, and there was an amount of delay in registering the FIR. So when such a ghastly incident of a huge dimension has occurred, and the police have gone there to to rescue the people and have seen the plight of the people, normally they are supposed to register the FIR immediately under the appropriate sections of law. So this, of course, this is on the aspect of delay. And zero FIR concept is that the police, whoever is whichever is the police station, the parties approach the concerned SHO of that police station has to necessarily register the FIR without bothering about whether that police station has got jurisdiction or not to investigate. If they have jurisdiction, they will investigate. If they don't have the jurisdiction, they will forward the FIR to the concerned police station. And that is about the concept of the zero FIR. And then the next aspect I was mentioning to you is investigation. So investigation, section 160, police officers power to require attendance of witnesses. So once the FIR is registered, sometimes they may mention the names of the witnesses, sometimes they will not mention the names. They can always require the persons who are concerned, who has witnessed the occurrence, who has not directly witnessed, but his evidence is also relevant. So they can call any witness and record their statements. But there is a proviso again that no male person, this was introduced recently in Amendment Act of 2013 with effect from 3 to 2013, 3rd February 2013, to the effect that no male person under the age of 15 years or above the age of 65 years, or a woman or a mentally or physically disabled person shall be required to attend at any place other than the place in which such male person or woman resides. That means the special category of persons, that is children below the age of 15 years, and then any woman irrespective of the age, and physically disabled persons and elderly persons aged above 65 years, they cannot be required to attend the police station, and the police have to go to their place of residence and record their statements during the course of investigation. So that is an important proviso made to, provide some succor to these women victims and senior citizens and children. Then important sections here are, we will not be dealing with every section. We'll only, because you are all faculty members, you know much better than me, and therefore we'll be discussing only a few important sections given the constraints of time. And section 161 and section 162, they are very important from a very practical point of view also, because these sections are referred to in the day-to-day functioning of the criminal courts in almost every case. Section 161 speaks of examination of witnesses by the police. So any police officer making investigation under this chapter, or any police officer not below the rank of, as the state government may by general or special order prescribe, acting on the requisition of such officer, may examine orally any person supposed to be acquainted with the facts and circumstances of the case. So the purpose of investigation is to gather evidence. How evidence can be gathered? Only by examining the witnesses. If there are sometimes there may be witnesses, sometimes there may not be witnesses, also direct witnesses to the occurrence. Most of the crimes are committed in secrecy. After ensuring privacy and secrecy, the offender, feels bold to commit the offense. So, in many cases, the direct evidence of eyewitnesses may not be there, but in some cases, there may be direct witnesses also. If there is a free fight, or if there is an attack in public daylight, in open daylight in the village by one group against other group, there will be witnesses, and therefore, whenever an offense takes place in the public place, then there's likelihood of witnesses. Therefore, the police will record the statements of these witnesses who are identified during the course of investigation under Section 161 CRPC. So the statement under Section 160 is of the complainant, and the statements under Section 161 CRPC are the statements of witnesses, and that includes the complainant also. So then there is a proviso relating to the crime against women. There are parallel amendments were made wherever they are required, wherever they are found necessary. And here also amendment is made by introducing a proviso that provided that the statements of women against whom an offence under 354 and 376 is alleged, then statement shall be recorded by woman police officer or any woman officer. This is again keeping in view the self-respect of the woman victim or the girl victim concerned, and to ensure privacy to her, and to enable her to make a statement out of her free will and volition without there being any compelling factors or inhibiting factors or intimidating factors. This proviso is introduced that while recording the statements of these witnesses in cases of crime against women under Section 354 or 376, these statements shall be recorded by a woman police officer or any woman officer. Then there is another proviso introduced recently by Amendment Act of 5 of 2009, with effect from 7/1/2000, with effect from 30/12/2009, that the statements made under the subsection may also be recorded by audio, video, electronic means. So now we are all in a global village, and physical distances do not matter. Just as we are now having this session online without our seeing each other or meeting each other, therefore the geographical distances have become irrelevant nowadays, where there is communication revolution, and therefore these statements by police officers can also be recorded through audio, video, electronic means, because the witness may be staying somewhere else or sometimes abroad also, and it will be very difficult to secure his attendance by the police for recording his statement because of the sheer distance and cost involved and expenditure involved. And therefore, this proviso is introduced to make the investigation process faster and quicker, so that the statements can be recorded through audio, video, electronic means also. That's about Section 161. But the Section 162 is more important, that no statement made by any person to a police officer in the course of investigation under this chapter shall, if reduced to writing, be signed by the person making it, not only such statement or a record thereof, whether in a police diary or otherwise, or any part of such statement or record be used for any purpose, save as hereinafter provided at any inquiry or trial in respect of any offence under investigation at the time when such statement was made. So this is very important. This has to be read in conjunction with sections 24, 25, 26, 29 of the Evidence Act. Therefore, any statement made to the police is not admissible in evidence. In fact, these statements need not be signed also by the person making the statement. The complaint statement given to the police based on which the FIR is registered, that will be signed. Whether it is a written complaint given to the police or whether it is a oral statement made to police, reduced writing by the police, that will be signed, because that constitutes the basis for registering the FIR. But here, these statements which are recorded by the police of the witnesses during the course of investigation, they need not be signed and they will not be signed, and they are not admissible in evidence also in view of section 25, 26, 29 of the Evidence Act, except for the purpose of contradiction, under section 157 of the Evidence Act. Because there are two aspects. One is corroboration, other is contradiction. For purpose of corroboration and contradiction, the FIR can be used. But the statements under 161 CRPC, they can be used only for contradiction. Contradiction occurs in two ways. One is that contradiction, that is, the witness making a statement on both before the court during the evidence, which is contrary to the statement made by him earlier before the police in the 161 statement. Suppose in the 161 statement, the eyewitness in a murder case, he said that he witnessed the occurrence and the victim was attacked with a knife. But in the court on both, he says that the weapon used was not knife but axe. Therefore, there is a contradiction between the two statements of the same person, one given before the police and other given before the court on both. So, for purpose of eliciting that contradiction, the statement under 161 can be used only to the extent of the contradiction. So, marking these contradictions is a very important and crucial job and requires some amount of skill and experience also on the part of the judicial officers because the entire statement cannot be marked. Only that particular sentence or a portion of sentence which really amounts to a contradiction or a material variation from his earlier statement, that alone is to be marked. Sometimes due to ignorance or inexperience, the entire sentence gets marked or entire statement gets marked, then that takes the court nowhere. On the other hand, that will be misleading also and it leads to miscarriage of justice also. So only that much portion of the statement which amounts to contradiction, that will be used as evidence, but not the rest of the statement. And the other way of contradiction is by way of omission. So omission is making a new statement in the evidence during the course of trial, which was not there earlier in the statement recorded by the police. For example, taking the same simple example of a murder case where the eyewitness says that on both before the court that I have seen the accused committing the offense and killing the victim, killing the deceased person, but he doesn't. He says that no, I do not know. And he says that the accused has used a knife for attacking the deceased person. But suppose this is not there in the earlier statement, that the accused used knife for attacking the deceased person. If this portion of the statement which is made by the witness on both in the evidence is not there, is found omitting in the earlier statement recorded by police, that amounts to a contradiction. So this statement can be used for the purpose of contradiction also. So if the contradiction is there, it can be directly marked or exhibited as evidence. Suppose if omission is there, it is a omission on a material aspect. What is the weapon used is a very important aspect to be considered by the court. Therefore, if there is a omission of a material aspect in the earlier statement, how to record it? How to record it is not there in the earlier statement. Therefore, it will be recorded in the form of citation by saying that it is not true because he is denying. The citation will be made to him. No, when you were examined by the police earlier during the course of investigation and your statement was recorded in 161, you have not stated that the accused was armed with a knife or accused has inflicted the fatal injuries with the knife. You have not stated. You are now saying it for the first time. It is denied. Then it will be recorded in the evidence that it is not true that I have not stated before the police that the accused was armed with a knife or he used this knife as a weapon to attack the deceased. In that